The stagecoach lurched to a halt before the Montrose Hotel, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered gold in the late afternoon sunlight. Beatrice Sullivan clutched her carpetbag tightly as she stepped down onto Colorado soil for the first time, her legs stiff from the 3-day journey. The year was 1878, and the mining town of Montrose was booming with silver strikes in the nearby San Juan Mountains. "Thank you kindly," Beatrice said to the driver who handed down her trunk. She smoothed her travel-worn navy blue dress, adjusted her small hat, and took a deep breath. At 23 years old, she had journeyed alone from Boston after receiving word of her uncle's passing. The letter had been unexpected, as was the news that he had left her his newspaper, the Montrose Chronicle. Beatrice had never imagined leaving Massachusetts, but after the printing house where she worked as a bookkeeper closed its doors, the inheritance seemed like providence. She'd sold what little she owned, packed her remaining possessions, and purchased a ticket west. Now, standing on the dusty main street of Montrose, she felt both exhilarated and terrified. The hotel before her was the grandest building on the street, a 3-story structure with a wide porch and ornate woodwork. Beatrice gathered her courage and made her way inside, the weight of her carpetbag pulling at her arm. The lobby was well appointed with velvet furniture and oil lamps casting a warm glow over polished wood. A balding man with spectacles looked up from behind the front desk. His welcoming smile faded as he assessed her appearance. "Good afternoon," Beatrice said, approaching the desk. "I would like a room, please. I have just arrived on the afternoon coach." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Traveling alone, miss?" "Yes, my name is Beatrice Sullivan. I have come to take ownership of the Montrose Chronicle. My uncle, Harold Sullivan, was the proprietor until his recent passing." The clerk's expression shifted from suspicion to something harder. "Sullivan's newspaper? I see." He cleared his throat. "I'm afraid we have no vacancies, Miss Sullivan." Beatrice glanced around the empty lobby. "No vacancies? But surely in such a large establishment." "As I said, we are full." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps you might try the boarding house on Cedar Street." A woman emerged from a side room, her silk dress rustling. She whispered something to the clerk, who nodded firmly. "Is there a problem?" Beatrice asked, straightening her spine. The woman, clearly the proprietress, stepped forward. "No problem at all, Miss Sullivan. We simply cannot accommodate single women traveling alone. It's a matter of reputation." "My reputation is perfectly intact, madam," Beatrice replied, her cheeks flushing. "And I require lodging after a very long journey." "Your uncle's opinions were well known in this town," the woman said coldly. "His newspaper caused nothing but trouble, stirring up miners against the mine owners, publishing those scandalous exposés. We cater to a certain clientele, Miss Sullivan. The boarding house would be more suitable." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected her uncle's legacy to precede her in this way. "I see. And where might I find this boarding house?" 3 blocks east," the clerk said, no longer meeting her eyes. "Though I cannot promise they will have space either." The humiliation burned hot in Beatrice's chest as she turned to leave. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles only to be refused a room because of her uncle's journalism. As she stepped back onto the porch, she realized the stagecoach had already departed, leaving her trunk sitting forlornly on the boardwalk. She blinked back tears of frustration. This wasn't Boston, where she knew every street and shopkeeper. The sun was already dipping toward the mountains, casting long shadows. Carrying her trunk to another establishment would be impossible alone. "Excuse me, madam. Are you in need of assistance?" Beatrice turned to find a tall man regarding her with concerned blue eyes. He wore a simple chambray shirt, worn denim pants, and dusty boots. A cowboy hat was pushed back on his head, revealing sandy brown hair. He wasn't dressed like the silver barons she'd seen entering the hotel, but there was something dignified in his bearing. Beatrice hesitated, unsure whether to confide in a stranger. "Colton Tucker," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I couldn't help noticing you seemed to be in a predicament." She squared her shoulders. "I'm afraid the hotel has no room for me." A knowing look crossed his face. "Let me guess, they suddenly found themselves fully booked?" "You seem unsurprised." Colton glanced at the hotel entrance. "The Richardsons are particular about who stays under their roof, especially when it comes to Sullivan's kin." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You know who I am?" "This town isn't big enough for secrets, Miss Sullivan. Word of Harold's niece coming to take over the paper has been circulating for weeks." He gestured to her trunk. "Where were you headed next?" "Apparently there's a boarding house on Cedar Street." Colton's expression dimmed. "Mrs. Whitaker's place? I wouldn't recommend it. She's the Richardsons' cousin and shares their sentiments about your uncle." "Oh!" Beatrice felt her composure slipping. "I don't suppose you could direct me to another establishment, then? I seem to have arrived rather unprepared." Colton studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "Miss Sullivan, I have a proposition that might sound forward, but I assure you it's offered with the utmost respect." He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I own a small ranch just outside town. It's modest, but there's a spare room that my sister used before she married and moved to Denver. It would be perfectly proper I'd sleep in the bunkhouse with my ranch hands." Beatrice stared at him, taken aback. "Mr. Tucker, I couldn't possibly—" "It would be temporary," he assured her. "Just until you can arrange more suitable accommodations or sort out your uncle's house. I understand he lived above the newspaper office, but I hear it's in some disarray." She bit her lip, considering her options. Night was approaching, and she was a stranger in a town that clearly harbored some resentment toward her family name. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A slow smile spread across Colton's face. "Your uncle was a good man. He wrote about the working conditions in the mines when no one else would. My father was a miner who died of lung sickness 5 years ago. Harold Sullivan was the only one who printed the truth about the lack of safety measures." He paused. "Besides, it's the decent thing to do." Something in his straightforward manner and steady gaze reassured her. Still, propriety nagged at her. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Tucker, but I couldn't possibly accept without compromising my reputation." Colton nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern." He seemed to consider something momentous, then spoke quietly. "There is another solution, though it may sound extreme." "What's that?" "My name," he said simply. "You could use my name." Beatrice blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "Marriage, Miss Sullivan. A marriage of convenience." Seeing her stunned expression, he hurried on. "It would solve your housing problem immediately and give you protection in a town that might not welcome you warmly. I'm respected here, the Tucker name would shield you." "Marriage?" Beatrice whispered, shocked. "To a complete stranger? Mr. Tucker, have you lost your mind?" "Probably," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But I need help too. I've been running the ranch alone since my father died, and it's more than one person can manage properly. I could use a partner. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Beatrice felt lightheaded. The idea was preposterous. Yet as she glanced back at the hotel's unwelcoming facade and thought of her meager funds, a cold practicality settled over her. She had come too far to turn back. "This is madness," she said. "Perhaps," Colton agreed, "but sometimes madness is the most sensible option. You need a place to stay and the protection of an established name in this town. I need help managing my affairs and keeping the ranch books. We could help each other." A passing townsman cast a curious glance their way. Beatrice lowered her voice. You would enter into marriage for that? There must be local women who would make more suitable partners. None who can read and write as well as Harold Sullivan's niece, I'd wager. He spoke of you in his last days, said you kept the books at a Boston printing house and had a mind for numbers and words alike. The mention of her uncle's approval touched her. He spoke of me? Often and with pride. Colton replaced his hat. Miss Sullivan, I'm offering a solution to your immediate problem, not asking for your heart. We would have separate rooms and separate lives if that's what you wish. But you would have the security of a home and the protection of my name while you establish yourself here. The sun sank lower, the mountain shadows stretching across the street. Beatrice considered her options, which were, in truth, few. If I were to consider this unusual proposal, how would it work? Surely we cannot simply declare ourselves married. Judge Morris lives just down the street. He could perform a civil ceremony immediately. Colton glanced at the darkening sky. I've known him my whole life. He'd do it without questions. Beatrice drew a deep breath, scarcely believing what she was contemplating. And you would truly expect nothing improper. You have my word as a gentleman. This would be a partnership of mutual benefit. If, after a suitable period, you wish to dissolve the arrangement, I wouldn't stand in your way. The practicality of the offer was becoming clearer. With her uncle's name apparently controversial in Montrose, having a respected local surname might make the difference between the newspaper's survival or failure. Very well, Mr. Tucker, she said with a steadiness that surprised even herself. I accept your proposal. Relief washed over his face. You've made a practical choice, Miss Sullivan. I promise you won't regret it. He lifted her trunk effortlessly. Judge Morris first, then we'll head to the ranch. My foreman can fetch your carpetbag. As they walked down the boardwalk toward the judge's office, Beatrice felt as though she were in a dream. The mountains loomed purple in the distance. The town bustled around her. And she was about to marry a man she had met mere minutes ago. Mr. Tucker, she said softly, I should tell you that I intend to continue my uncle's work. If his reporting made enemies, mine likely will too. Colton nodded. I figured as much. Truth has a way of disturbing those who profit from lies. He looked down at her with a surprising gentleness. I'm not afraid of a little controversy, Miss Sullivan. Beatrice, she corrected. If we're to be married, however unconventional the arrangement, you should use my given name. Beatrice, he repeated, the name sounding different in his low voice. And I'm Colton, though most folks call me Colt. They arrived at a small office with Morris, Justice of the Peace, painted on the window. Colton set down the trunk and faced her. Last chance to reconsider, Beatrice. Once we do this, the town will consider us truly married. She took a deep breath, thinking of her empty purse, her uncle's legacy, and the long journey she had made to claim it. I'm certain, she said, surprised to find she meant it. Let's proceed, Colton. Judge Morris was a thin man with spectacles and a kind face. He raised an eyebrow at their request but asked no uncomfortable questions when Colton explained they needed to be married immediately. Within 20 minutes, Beatrice Sullivan became Mrs. Beatrice Tucker in a simple ceremony with the judge's wife and clerk as witnesses. As they left the office, marriage certificate in hand, Beatrice felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. She had secured shelter and protection, but at what cost to her independence? Colton helped her into his wagon, setting her trunk in the back. The ranch is about 3 miles outside town, he explained. It's not grand, but it's good land. They traveled mostly in silence, both seemingly awed by the impulsive decision they had made. As they crested a hill, Colton pointed ahead. Tucker Ranch. My father established it when he gave up mining. Beatrice saw a neat cabin with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A corral held horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. Mountains framed the property on 3 sides, their peaks still holding snow despite the spring warmth. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. 2 men emerged from the barn as they approached. Colton introduced them as Miguel and Eduardo, brothers from New Mexico who worked as his ranch hands. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Beatrice Sullivan, that is, Mrs. Tucker now. We were married this afternoon." The men's surprise was evident, but they recovered quickly, offering congratulations. Colton explained the situation to them privately while Beatrice waited on the porch, still struggling to process the day's events. When Colton returned, he showed her inside the cabin. It was simple but well kept, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and a solid wooden table. 2 doors led to bedrooms at the back. "This one's yours," Colton said, opening the door to a small but clean room with a bed, dresser, and window overlooking the mountains. "My sister left some clothes that might fit you until you can retrieve your uncle's things or order new ones." "Thank you," Beatrice said, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. "This is most generous." Colton shifted uncomfortably. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse as I promised. The men and I rise early, but you should rest as long as you need." He hesitated. "Hungry? I can fix something simple." The thought of food reminded her she hadn't eaten since morning. "That would be nice, thank you." They shared a simple meal of beans, bread, and coffee at the table. Conversation was awkward at first, but gradually they began sharing the basic facts of their lives. Colton had been born in Colorado, the son of a silver miner who had saved enough to buy land. He'd learned ranching from neighbors and books, building the herd slowly over the years. His mother had died when he was young, and his sister had married a shopkeeper in Denver 2 years prior. Beatrice told him about growing up in Boston, losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, and working at the printing house until its closure. She explained that her uncle's letters had been her connection to family, though they had never met in person. "He was ill for some time," Colton said gently. "The newspaper kept running, but he wasn't able to write those exposés that made him famous in his last year. People wondered if the Chronicle would continue after him." "It will," Beatrice said firmly. "I may not have his experience, but I understand the importance of what he did. Someone must speak for those without power." Colton studied her with new respect. "You'll face opposition." "I expect so. But I didn't come all this way to be intimidated." A smile tugged at his mouth. "I believe you, Mrs. Tucker." He stood, collecting their plates. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we can go to the newspaper office and see what needs to be done." Beatrice retired to her room, grateful for the privacy. As she unpacked her few belongings, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. Mrs. Tucker. The name felt foreign, the gold band on her finger unfamiliar. Yet there was no denying the practical benefits of the arrangement. She changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses, the whisper of wind through pines. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that her life had changed more in one day than in all her 23 years before. Morning came with golden light streaming through her window. Beatrice, dressed in one of the dresses Colton's sister had left behind, a simple blue calico that was slightly large but serviceable. She found coffee warming on the stove, but no sign of Colton. Through the window, she saw him in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. He moved with confidence, his voice a low murmur as he guided the animal in circles. There was a gentleness to his handling that contrasted with his strong physique. Beatrice poured coffee and stepped onto the porch, watching. When Colton noticed her, he handed the horse's lead to Eduardo and approached, wiping his brow. "Good morning, Mrs. Tucker. Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. And please, when we're alone, Beatrice will do." He nodded. "Ready to see your inheritance today?" "Quite ready. I'm eager to understand what I'm working with." After a quick breakfast, they rode into town together on horseback. Beatrice somewhat unsteadily on a gentle mare Colton assured her was perfectly behaved. The ride gave her a better view of Montrose, a town clearly in transition from mining camp to established settlement. Wooden buildings lined the main street, with newer brick structures interspersed. The mountains provided a dramatic backdrop, their peaks gleaming in the morning light. The Montrose Chronicle occupied a narrow two-story building between a hardware store and a millinery shop. The ground floor housed the newspaper office and printing press, while the upper floor had been her uncle's living quarters. A closed sign hung in the window, but Colton produced a key. "Doc Simmons gave me this after your uncle passed. He thought someone should check on the place occasionally." The interior was dusty but organized. A large printing press dominated the back of the room, while a desk near the front held stacks of papers. Shelves along one wall contained back issues bound with twine, organized by date. The familiar smell of ink and paper made Beatrice feel unexpectedly at home. "It's more orderly than I expected," she said, running a finger along the desk. "Your uncle was methodical, even when ill." Colton moved to a side door. "The stairs to the apartment are here." The upstairs was a simple two-room apartment, a main living area with a small kitchen and a bedroom. Books filled every available space, and notes were pinned to the walls. It was the home of a man dedicated to his work. "He lived modestly," Colton observed, "as did I in Boston." Beatrice moved to the window which overlooked the main street. From here, he could see the whole town. Harold believed in watching closely. Nothing escaped his notice. They spent the morning going through the newspaper's accounts. Beatrice was relieved to discover that while not wealthy, the Chronicle was solvent. Subscription payments were due, advertising needed to be collected, and there was a small reserve in the bank. "The last edition came out 3 weeks ago," Colton explained. "People have been wondering if there would be another." "There will be," Beatrice said firmly. "I'll need to learn the printing press, but I can manage the writing and accounts immediately." "I can show you the basics of the press," Colton offered. "I helped your uncle occasionally when his hands were too painful to set type." Beatrice looked at him with surprise. "You're full of unexpected talents, Mr. Tucker." "Just practical experience," he replied. "And it's Colt, remember?" They spent the afternoon cleaning the apartment and office. Beatrice decided she would divide her time between the newspaper and the ranch, staying in town when deadlines approached but returning to the ranch in between. It was an unconventional arrangement, but then, everything about her current situation defied convention. As they worked, townspeople occasionally peered through the windows, curious about the activity. Some entered, introducing themselves with varying degrees of warmth. Most were cautiously polite upon learning she was now Mrs. Tucker, their surprise at Colton's sudden marriage evident. "You've given them something to talk about," Beatrice observed after a particularly curious visitor departed. "Small towns thrive on gossip," Colton replied with a shrug. "Better they discuss our hasty marriage than refuse you service." By late afternoon, the office was presentable, and Beatrice had drafted an announcement for the next edition, her first as publisher. She would introduce herself to readers and assure them of the Chronicle's continued dedication to truth and justice. As they prepared to return to the ranch, the door opened, admitting a well-dressed man with an expensive hat and gold watch chain. "Tucker," he said with a nod to Colton. "Thought I saw you in here. Didn't expect to find you playing at newspapers." His gaze shifted to Beatrice, assessing. "And this must be Sullivan's niece." "Edgar Blackwell," Colton said, his tone neutral. "Meet my wife, Beatrice Tucker." Blackwell's eyebrows shot up. Wife? Well now, that's interesting news. He removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair. Congratulations, Mrs. Tucker. You've made a fast impression on our town. Something in his tone made Beatrice wary. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I'm pleased to be continuing my uncle's work. Are you indeed? Blackwell replaced his hat. Your uncle had some progressive ideas about reporting. I do hope you'll take time to understand our community before making any hasty judgments. I believe in facts, Mr. Blackwell. They rarely require interpretation. A tight smile crossed his face. Facts can be presented in many ways, Mrs. Tucker. As the owner of the Silver Ridge Mine and president of the Merchants Association, I'd be happy to provide you with the facts about our town's prosperity and growth. I appreciate the offer, Beatrice said carefully. I'll be seeking information from many sources, including the miners themselves, I expect, Blackwell said, his eyes flicking to Colton. Your new husband has always had a soft spot for the working man's complaints, much like your uncle. Colton stepped forward slightly. Was there something specific you needed today, Edgar? Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just being neighborly, welcoming our newest resident. I'll look forward to reading your first edition, Mrs. Tucker. I do hope it will be more balanced than some of your uncle's work. After he left, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I believe I've just met my first adversary. Blackwell owns half the businesses in town through investments or loans, Colton explained. He didn't appreciate your uncle's articles about working conditions or wages. I see. Beatrice gathered her notes. Well, Mr. Blackwell will need to grow accustomed to disappointment. I intend to honor my uncle's approach to journalism. Colton's expression was unreadable. That's what I was afraid of. Over the next 2 weeks, Beatrice established a routine. She spent mornings at the ranch, learning about Colton's operation and helping with the account books, which she discovered were in decent order but could benefit from her systematic approach. Afternoons were dedicated to the newspaper, where she interviewed townspeople, wrote articles, and learned to operate the printing press under Colton's patient instruction. Their marriage remained strictly professional. Colton continued sleeping in the bunkhouse, and their interactions, while increasingly comfortable, maintained appropriate boundaries. Yet Beatrice found herself noticing small things about him: the gentleness with which he handled frightened animals, his quiet competence with difficult tasks, his dry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. The first edition of the Chronicle under her management proved popular, selling out within hours. Her editorial introducing herself was measured but firm in its commitment to honest reporting. She included articles about local events, mining developments, and a piece about the need for a proper school building. Not everyone appreciated her approach. When she began investigating working conditions at Silver Ridge Mine, several merchants canceled their advertising. The hotel restaurant refused to serve her when she went to interview a visitor. But for each closed door, another opened. Miners and their families provided information. Smaller business owners, tired of Blackwell's influence, supported the paper. Colton never interfered with her work, though she sometimes caught him watching her with concern when particularly threatening letters arrived at the Chronicle office. His support was steady but unobtrusive, offering protection without attempting to control her. One evening, as they sat on the ranch house porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues, Beatrice finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Why did you really offer to marry me, Colton? The truth, please. He was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I told you I admired your uncle and needed help with the ranch. There's more, she pressed. Most men wouldn't marry a stranger for such reasons. Colton sighed. My father died because the mine owners wouldn't install proper ventilation systems. He spent his last months struggling for breath, unable to work. Your uncle was the only one who would print the truth about what was happening to the miners. He looked at the mountains. When I heard how they were treating you in town, it felt like the same injustice. The powerful shutting out voices they don't want to hear. Beatrice studied his profile in the fading light. So it was a matter of principle? Partly. He met her gaze. But I also saw something in you that first day, a determination I admired. You weren't backing down, even when you had nowhere to go. The honesty in his voice touched her. Thank you for telling me. What about you? Colton asked. Why did you accept? Necessity at first, she admitted. But I've come to appreciate the arrangement beyond its practical benefits. You've been kind and respectful. Not all women are so fortunate in their marriages, even those entered into with far more consideration. A comfortable silence fell between them as darkness crept over the land. Stars appeared, brighter than Beatrice had ever seen in Boston. We should go to the Founders' Day dance next weekend, Colton said suddenly. The whole town will be there. It would look strange if we weren't. A dance? Beatrice hadn't considered such social obligations. I'm not sure I'd be welcome. You're Mrs. Tucker now, he reminded her. Besides, it's time people got used to seeing us together as a couple. The word couple sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Very well. Though I must warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. His mouth quirked up. That makes two of us. The Founders' Day celebration transformed the town square into a festive gathering. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, a platform had been erected for musicians, and tables groaned with food contributed by townspeople. Everyone from mine owners to shopkeepers to ranch hands attended, making it the social event of the season. Beatrice wore her best dress, a forest green garment she'd altered from one of Colton's sister's gowns. Colton had traded his work clothes for a clean shirt, vest, and string tie. As they entered the square together, Beatrice was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers their appearance generated. Just smile, Colton murmured, placing his hand at the small of her back. They'll get used to us eventually. The music was lively fiddles, a guitar, and an accordion playing familiar tunes. Couples swirled around the dancing area, their movements illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns. Edgar Blackwell approached, his wife on his arm, a delicate blonde woman with an expensive dress and a practiced smile. Tucker, Mrs. Tucker, he greeted them. Enjoying the festivities? We've just arrived, Colton replied evenly. How? Interesting to see the town's newest couple, Mrs. Blackwell said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes calculating. Such a whirlwind romance. Why? No one even knew you were courting. Sometimes you just know when something is right, Beatrice replied with equal sweetness. When did you and Mr. Blackwell marry, Mrs. Blackwell? 8 years ago in Denver. My father was a banking associate of Edgar's. How convenient, Beatrice said, earning a subtle squeeze on her elbow from Colton. Blackwell's smile tightened. I understand you're continuing your uncle's editorial position regarding the mines, Mrs. Tucker. I believe in reporting facts, Mr. Blackwell. The miners' health concerns are certainly factual. Facts can be misleading without context, he replied. Mining has built this town and provides livelihoods for hundreds. Including decent working conditions would only strengthen that contribution, Beatrice countered. Mrs. Blackwell laughed artificially. Such serious conversation for a celebration. Edgar, surely business can wait for another day. She turned to Beatrice. You must tell me about Boston sometime. I so adore Eastern sophistication. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before the Blackwells moved on. Colton guided Beatrice toward the refreshment table. You handle him well, he observed. Most people are too intimidated to challenge Edgar. I grew up watching my father stand up to powerful men, she replied. He always said their power existed partly because others believed in it. They sampled the food and greeted various townspeople. Some were genuinely welcoming, others merely curious. The newspaper was a frequent topic, with readers offering both criticism and praise for her first editions. When the band struck up a waltz, Colton held out his hand. "Shall we, Mrs. Tucker?" "It seems expected." Beatrice placed her hand in his, surprised by the warmth that spread from his touch. "Lead on, Mr. Tucker." He guided her into the dance, his hand firm at her waist. For a man who claimed not to dance much, he moved with confidence. Beatrice followed his lead, gradually relaxing into the rhythm. "You're better at this than you admitted," she said as they turned beneath the lanterns. "My mother insisted I learn the basics. Said no girl would marry a man who couldn't manage a simple waltz." "She was quite right," Beatrice replied with a small smile. "Though in our case, the dancing skills were discovered after the wedding." His laugh was low and pleasant. "We did things in an unconventional order, didn't we?" As they danced, Beatrice became increasingly aware of Colton's physical presence, his height, the strength in his arms, the clean scent of soap and pine. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge that her husband was an attractive man. The thought startled her. Their arrangement was practical, not romantic. Yet as the music swelled and his arm tightened slightly around her waist, she couldn't deny a flutter of something more than practicality. The spell broke when the music ended. Colton stepped back, his hand lingering briefly on hers before dropping away. "Thank you for the dance, Beatrice." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the edge of the square. Raised voices carried through the night air, and people turned to watch as a group of miners confronted Edgar Blackwell. "You promised the new ventilation system would be installed by now," one man was saying, his voice rough with anger. "3 men collapsed yesterday." Blackwell's response was too low to hear, but his dismissive gesture was clear. The miners grew more agitated, surrounding him. Mrs. Blackwell backed away, looking frightened. Colton tensed beside Beatrice. This could turn ugly. He moved toward the confrontation, and Beatrice followed. "The company has record profits," another miner was saying. "But we're still breathing dust and fumes." Blackwell's face had reddened. "This is hardly the time or place for such discussions. If you have concerns, bring them to the foreman during working hours." "We've tried," the first miner replied. "He says the same thing you do next month, next season." Meanwhile, good men are getting sick. The sheriff had appeared, his hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. "That's enough now, boys. This is a celebration." Colton stepped forward. "Why not set a specific date, Blackwell? Give these men something concrete." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, Tucker. It doesn't concern you." "The health of our community concerns everyone," Beatrice said, moving to stand beside Colton. The crowd parted slightly, revealing her presence. Perhaps the Chronicle should investigate the delay in safety improvements. Blackwell's expression hardened. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Tucker?" "It's journalism, Mr. Blackwell. Facts without context can indeed be misleading, which is why I'd like to understand why promised safety measures haven't been implemented." The miners murmured in approval. Blackwell looked around, realizing he was losing the public confrontation. "Very well," he said coldly. "I'll meet with representatives tomorrow morning. We'll discuss a timeline." As the tension dissipated, the miners dispersed, and the music tentatively resumed. Blackwell gave Beatrice and Colton a look that could have frozen water. "You'll regret interfering in my business," he said quietly before walking away. Colton placed a protective hand on Beatrice's back. You've made a powerful enemy tonight." "He was already an enemy," she replied. "At least now it's in the open." They remained at the dance for another hour, but the evening's carefree spirit had diminished. When they finally rode home under a canopy of stars, Beatrice found herself reflecting on how naturally they had stood together against Blackwell. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt truly aligned with someone. "Thank you for supporting me tonight," she said as they approached the ranch. "You didn't have to involve yourself." Colton was quiet for a moment. "We're partners now, Beatrice. That means standing together when it matters." The word partners warmed her more than it should have. As they stabled the horses and prepared to part ways for the night, Colton to the bunkhouse, Beatrice to the main house, she found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "Good night, Colton," she said, lingering on the porch. "I enjoyed our dance." He studied her face in the moonlight. "As did I." For a moment, she thought he might step closer, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Sleep well, Beatrice." As she prepared for bed, Beatrice found herself remembering the feel of his hand at her waist, the security of his presence beside her during the confrontation with Blackwell. Their arrangement might have begun as one of convenience, but something was shifting between them, something neither had anticipated. The next morning brought consequences. When Beatrice arrived at the Chronicle office, she found the front window shattered, glass littering the floor. A rock wrapped in paper lay among the shards. The note read simply, "Stop writing or next time it won't be a window." She was sweeping up the glass when Colton arrived, his expression darkening as he surveyed the damage. "Blackwell's work," he said, examining the note. "We don't know that," Beatrice replied, though she suspected the same. "I do." Colton's jaw tightened. "This is how he operates intimidation from the shadows. We should report this to the sheriff." Sheriff Davis was sympathetic but not hopeful. "Without witnesses, there's little I can do, Mrs. Tucker, but I'll keep an eye on your place when I make my rounds." Colton arranged for the window to be replaced while Beatrice worked on her next edition. She wrote a front-page article about the miners' concerns and Blackwell's promise to address them. She was careful to present the facts without inflammatory language, but she didn't soften the truth either. When the paper came out 3 days later, the town buzzed with discussion. The miners were grateful for the coverage, but several businesses loyal to Blackwell canceled their advertisements. More worryingly, the bank manager hinted that the Chronicle's loan might need reassessment. "He's trying to strangle us financially," Beatrice told Colton that evening as they went over the books at the ranch house table. "Can we survive without those advertisers?" "For a while. I've been approaching smaller businesses that might benefit from reaching our readers." She rubbed her temples. "But if the bank calls in the loan, we'll have serious problems." Colton considered this. "I have some savings. Not enough to pay off the loan entirely, but it could help." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "This is my battle. I won't risk your ranch." "Our battles are shared now," he reminded her. "Besides, I believe in what you're doing. Your uncle would be proud." Beatrice looked at him across the table, truly seeing the man she had impulsively married. In the weeks since their hasty wedding, Colton Tucker had proven himself to be steadfast, principled, and unfailingly supportive. What had begun as gratitude was evolving into something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster when he entered a room. "Thank you," she said softly, "but let's consider that a last resort." The pressure from Blackwell intensified over the following weeks. The Chronicle suppliers began charging higher rates. Anonymous letters threatened both the newspaper and Beatrice personally. Someone poisoned one of Colton's horses, though fortunately, the animal recovered. Through it all, Beatrice continued publishing, and the Chronicle's reputation for honest reporting grew. Subscription numbers actually increased as people respected the paper's refusal to be intimidated. Miners began sharing more information about dangerous conditions, enabling Beatrice to publish detailed accounts that couldn't be dismissed as mere complaints. The dynamics of her marriage were changing too. Colton began joining her for research, his knowledge of the community proving invaluable. They spent evenings discussing articles and strategies, their conversations flowing easily from business to personal memories and hopes. Though he still slept in the bunkhouse, their emotional distance had decreased significantly. One rainy afternoon, as they worked together in the Chronicle office, setting type for the next day's edition, Beatrice found herself watching Colton's hands strong, capable hands that could gentle a wild horse or arrange tiny metal letters with equal skill. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I was admiring your technique. You're much faster than I am with the typesetting." "Practice," he replied, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Your uncle was a patient teacher. You two were close?" "He was the closest thing to a mentor I had after my father died." Colton placed another letter carefully. "He believed in me when others saw just a miner's son trying to run a ranch." "He must have seen the same qualities in you that I do," Beatrice said without thinking. Colton's hands stilled. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what qualities are those, Beatrice?" She could have retreated, could have made a light response. Instead, she chose honesty, integrity, compassion, strength that doesn't need to dominate others. The air between them seemed to thicken. Colton set down the composing stick and moved around the table until he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've been trying to maintain our agreement," he said quietly, "to keep the proper distance. But I find myself thinking of you in ways that go beyond our arrangement." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. "As do I," she admitted. His hand rose slowly to touch her cheek, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his fingers traced the line of her jaw with exquisite gentleness. "This isn't what you agreed to. Perhaps what I want has changed," she whispered. The kiss that followed was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When Beatrice responded, sliding her arms around his neck, Colton deepened the kiss, drawing her against him with careful strength. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced, a perfect combination of tenderness and passion that made her feel both protected and desired. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the Founders' Day dance." "Why didn't you?" "I needed to be sure you wanted it too." His thumb stroked her cheek. "Our beginning was unusual enough without adding unwelcome advances." The printing press suddenly seemed far less important than the man before her. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." They barely noticed the rain as they rode back to the ranch, a new awareness crackling between them. That evening, for the first time, Colton didn't return to the bunkhouse. Their marriage, begun in pragmatism, transformed into something genuine and deeply felt. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay together in what was now truly their shared bedroom, Beatrice traced the contours of his face. "I never expected this when I stepped off that stagecoach." "Nor did I when I offered you my name," Colton replied, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "But I can't regret a single moment." The change in their relationship didn't go unnoticed in town. Where before there had been speculation about their hasty marriage, now there were knowing smiles at the obvious affection between them. Even Edgar Blackwell seemed to recognize that his financial pressure tactics weren't achieving their desired effect. The Chronicle continued publishing, and public opinion was increasingly turning against the mine owner as safety issues remained unaddressed. Summer turned to fall, bringing crisp mornings and golden aspens to the mountains. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Colton handling the physical work while Beatrice applied her organizational skills to the business aspects. The newspaper gained subscriptions in neighboring communities, expanding its influence. Then came the disaster they had feared. An explosion at the Silver Ridge mine trapped 27 miners underground. The cause was immediately apparent to anyone familiar with mining operations. Accumulated gas that would have been removed by proper ventilation systems. Beatrice and Colton rushed to the mine site, where families gathered in anguished vigils while rescue efforts proceeded. The air was thick with coal dust and fear. Edgar Blackwell arrived in his carriage, his face ashen as he confronted the consequences of his negligence. "This is your doing," a miner's wife shouted at him. The Chronicle warned this would happen. For once, Blackwell had no smooth response. The evidence of his cost-cutting was buried with the men still trapped below. Rescue efforts continued through the night, with Colton joining the teams working to clear debris. Beatrice documented everything, interviewing survivors and family members, recording the heroism of rescuers and the anguish of those waiting for news. By morning, 14 men had been brought out alive. 13 bodies were recovered. The town was in mourning but also in anger. When the Chronicle published its account of the disaster, including years of warnings about inadequate safety measures, public sentiment crystallized against Blackwell. At a town meeting called to address the tragedy, miners and townspeople alike demanded accountability. Blackwell tried to deflect blame onto the mine foreman, but Beatrice produced records showing the owner had repeatedly denied requests for safety improvements. "These deaths were preventable," she said, her voice carrying through the packed town hall. "The Chronicle has documented the warnings for years. My husband and others have personally witnessed the dangerous conditions. This wasn't an accident, it was negligence." The meeting ended with the formation of a miners' committee to negotiate with mine owners and a unanimous vote to petition the territorial governor for safety inspections. Blackwell left the hall in disgrace, his influence shattered. In the aftermath of the disaster, a new Montrose began to emerge. Safety reforms were implemented at the mine under the watchful eye of government inspectors. Blackwell eventually sold his interests and left town, unable to face the community he had betrayed. The Chronicle flourished, respected for its role in bringing about necessary changes. As winter settled over the mountains, bringing deep snows and quiet evenings by the fireplace, Beatrice and Colton reflected on the extraordinary year that had brought them together. "I received a letter from my sister today," Colton said one evening as they sat before the fire. "She's finally coming to visit in the spring. She's eager to meet the woman who, in her words, tamed her wild brother and reformed a town." Beatrice laughed. "Hardly single-handedly. And as for taming you, I rather prefer you untamed." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I have something to confess, Beatrice. That first day, when I offered you my name, it wasn't entirely selfless." "No?" She looked up at him curiously. "No. There was something about you, your courage, your determination that struck me immediately. I told myself it was admiration, respect for your uncle's family. But I think, even then, my heart recognized something my mind hadn't yet realized." "And what was that?" His eyes, reflecting the firelight, held hers steadily. "That you were the woman I'd been waiting for without knowing it." Beatrice felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "For a practical arrangement, this marriage has turned out rather wonderfully impractical. The best things often do." Colton hesitated. "Speaking of impractical matters, how would you feel about making this family a bit larger?" Her heart skipped. "Are you suggesting what I think you are? We have the space, the means, and, I hope, the love to offer a child." Beatrice took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. Then I have a confession of my own. I've suspected for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be certain before telling you. Colton's expression transformed, wonder and joy illuminating his features. Truly, Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday. By summer's end, there will be 3 of us at Tucker Ranch. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. I love you, Beatrice Tucker, more than I ever thought possible when I offered you my name. And I love you, Colton Tucker, far more than I imagined when I accepted it. As snow fell softly outside, blanketing the land in pristine white, they remained by the fire, planning their future, a future neither could have envisioned, when a hotel refused service to a determined young woman, and a principled cowboy offered his home and his name. Spring came to Colorado in a burst of wildflowers and new beginnings. The mountains shed their snow, creeks swelled with clear, cold water, and meadows turned emerald green. At Tucker Ranch, life flourished, cattle fattened on fresh grass, crops sprouted in tilled fields, and Beatrice's belly grew round with new life. The Chronicle continued its work under Beatrice's guidance, though she had trained an assistant editor to handle daily operations as her pregnancy advanced. Colton expanded the ranch, adding sheep to diversify their income. Together, they built a life that balanced principle with prosperity, never forgetting the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. On a perfect July morning, with sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and meadowlarks singing in the fields, William Harold Tucker entered the world a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. "He's perfect," Colton whispered, cradling his son with hands that trembled slightly. "Absolutely perfect." Beatrice watched her husband and child, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "He has quite a story to inherit one day." "The best kind," Colton agreed. "One that reminds him that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as misfortunes." As William grew from infant to toddler, the Tucker family prospered. The ranch expanded, the newspaper's influence reached throughout the county, and Montrose itself evolved into a community known for fairness and opportunity. Mines operated with proper safety measures, businesses thrived under ethical leadership, and the hotel that had once refused service to a single woman traveler now proudly displayed a sign welcoming all respectable guests regardless of gender or circumstances. 3 years after William's birth, the family welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Grace Tucker, completing their happiness. The children grew up with both the freedom of ranch life and the intellectual stimulation of the newspaper office, learning early the values their parents cherished: honesty, compassion, and the courage to stand for what was right. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised Beatrice with a gift, the deed to the hotel that had once turned her away, purchased when its owners decided to retire to Denver. "What on earth shall we do with a hotel?" she asked, amazed by his gesture. "Whatever you wish," he replied. "Though I thought perhaps a place where travelers, especially women traveling alone, would always find welcome might be appropriate." Beatrice renamed it the Welcome Inn, and under her management, it became known throughout the territory as an establishment of impeccable hospitality and fairness. The grand opening was attended by the entire town, including many who had once supported Blackwell's discriminatory policies, but had since recognized the benefits of a more inclusive community. As the years passed, Beatrice and Colton watched their children grow, their businesses flourish, and their love deepen. The practical arrangement that had begun their marriage had blossomed into a partnership so profound that neither could imagine life without the other. On cool evenings, they still sat together on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in spectacular colors. Sometimes they reminisced about their unusual beginning, a desperate young woman with nowhere to go, a principled rancher with an unconventional solution. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one such evening, her hand comfortably entwined with his. "Offering your name to a stranger?" Colton's smile was as warm as the day they had first exchanged vows. Not for a single moment. Best impulsive decision I ever made. Mine too, she agreed, leaning against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Though I do wonder what would have happened if that hotel had been more welcoming. Then I would have had to find another excuse to meet you, Colton said with certainty. Some things are simply meant to be. As night fell over Tucker Ranch, bringing with it the peaceful sounds of a prosperous homestead, Beatrice reflected on the twists of fate that had led her to this moment. A refused room, a generous offer, a marriage of convenience that had become the greatest love of her life. Sometimes, she thought, the most unexpected beginnings led to the most perfect endings. And in the heart of Colorado's mountains, surrounded by family and community, Beatrice and Colton Tucker had found exactly that, an ending more perfect than either could have dreamed when their story began.